Hi guys, I'm going to be reading the book Winter House. So let's get started. A troubling note. When Elizabeth Somers tugged open the gate to her aunt and uncle's yard and saw an envelope duct taped to the front door of the shabby house, she shared with them. She knew it was bad news. The porch steps, which her uncle Burlap never kept clean, were slick with snow and ice, and so Elizabeth stepped carefully up, set down her school backpack, and slid her hood from her head with a wet shake. She already had a pretty good idea what the note inside would say as she plucked it out from the door, and then it opened. We informed you several times that we would be going on a 3 week gateway and you would not be staying alone while we are gone. So you won't be surprised to find this letter. The house is locked tight. There is a ticket for the 6:20 train north in this envelope. Catch that train, and when you get off in the morning, that's Heaven, where there will be a ticket waiting for you at the bus station. Get on the bus that goes to Winter House Hotel. They they will be expecting you. Here are $3 in case you need anything on the way. You will get another ticket to come back after New Year. Don't cause any trouble for anyone. None of your nonsense. Elizabeth studied the train ticket. 6:20 was in 3 hours. The first 3 hours of her 24 days of Christmas vacation, and they had promised after lessering her for the past 2 weeks how they would be leaving for Christmas and Elizabeth would be sent away. Her aunt and uncle really were gone. Elizabeth gazed at the street through her foggy glasses. The snow was falling harder. A plastic grocery bag hung on the doorknob. Elizabeth peeked inside and saw, filled with three three of her shirts, two pair of socks, a pair of pants, and some undergarments. She examined the three grimy dollar bills she would have been given, all while imagining Aunt Purdy peeling tantly smoothing them into the envelope. In, in Elizabeth's imagination, Uncle Burlap was standing beside her and eyeing the money doubtfully, and as if this amount was too much. She let this picture fade away, the steam of her breath in the chill air. Elizabeth read the note once more. She stuffed it onto her jacket with the money and ticket, and then unzipped her backpack. From the bottom of it, beneath four paperbacks, the school librarian had allowed her to check out for the winter break, and her own volume of Anna of Green Gables. She removed a pen and a small notepad. The notepad was a spiral bound along the top edge, green covered and worn with creases. The sort of pad a waiter might use to take your order at the restaurant. Elizabeth flipped it open, and the fifth page, entry number 43 on her of the list of reasons why I don't like my aunt and uncle. She wrote, because they were sending me to a hotel in the middle of nowhere during Christmas with no money and hardly any clothes. She turned the notepad to its place, then put the plastic grocery bag inside her backpack, zipped it closed. She was about to leave, but found herself staring at the strip of duct tape that had held the envelope. Her breath rising high and tight in her chest. Her eyes beginning to water, and then she realized what she was doing. She slammed her palm at the plywood of the door. So, the sound sharp the quack like the noise of a book dropped on a wooden floor. Startled Elizabeth, made her wonder what had gotten into her. She looked around to see if anyone was watching, but all was silent. Then an empty street glowing in the darkness. With the snow falling more heavily, Elizabeth sighed, picked up her backpack. Why can't I have my parents back? She thought. And then because there were no friends and she might possibly ask to stay with 3 weeks and no chance of avoiding her aunt and uncle's anger. If she didn't follow their instructions, Elizabeth turned to walk a mile and a half to the station to wait for the 6:20 train to Stern Heaven. Stern Heaven. She hoisted her backpack onto her shoulders and retraced her steps to the gate, and right as she stepped out of the yard onto the sidewalk, the feeling came over her. She froze in the place, wide-eyed, and wondered what was going to happen this time. Her heart began to beat quickly. All was silent, and a loud crash sounded behind her. So we're going to be reading 2 chapters, and then there's going to be another video about it. Strange passengers on the bus. So I have the book where it says, like, below the bus it has 4 other words. So bus, by, bay, may, and man. So the station and Elizabeth had was the one you would get when you were certain of something, good or bad, fun or not, not fun or not so fun. This is about to occur. She couldn't explain why whenever the feeling came over her that she had this certainty, or even the feeling that came over her. She only knew that she only knew it had started the previous summer, and it had been happening more often as winter approached. What what was what was odd was that things that occurred seemed to have no cause or explanation. Maybe a book fell out of a nearby shelf, or a glass would topple in the sink. Her empty lunch tray would slide off the table while she ate her mashed potatoes and gravy in the school cafeteria. All she knew was that right before each of these incidents, they experienced a stomach flutter that made her certain something was going to happen. Which way, when the feeling struck her snowy sidewalk just then, she was unsurprised to hear the noise behind her. Eliza turned to see the gate. She didn't touch, and which could not be possibly swing closed its own, had slammed shut, and she was relieved. Compared to the plate breaking or a book slamming onto the floor, this was harmless. Still, even though she had nearly stopped being frightened, these odd bangs and crashes, she wanted to understand why they happened and why the feeling came over her. She She looked around the block once more to see if anyone had noticed the noise of the gate, but saw no one. With a deep sigh and one last look at her aunt and uncle's house, Elizabeth headed for the train station. Near dusk the day after all-night train ride and near dusk next day after all-night train ride and a 5-hour wait at the bus station, Elizabeth sat and watched the snow fall outside the ice cream window of the bus. The only food she had eaten had been a leftover lunch of peanut butter sandwich from a previous day's lunch, sunflower seeds and rice that she had bought for $1.35 at the train depot, and a candy that she had found in the magazine compartment of her train seat. She kept trying not to think depressing thoughts. Just a second, guys. The road taking her closer to some destination in the mountains where she would spend her Christmas holiday at a hotel she imagined would be cross between old person's nursing home and a creepy place they took kids to the Golden Compass, one of her favorite books. For 7 years she had been hoping for someone to rescue her from her aunt and uncle ever since she had been living with them. But 3 weeks at Winter House Hotel seemed less like good luck than some clever punishment they had cooked up. Elizabeth was 11 now, and aside from the fact that she had been looking forward to annual Christmas pageant held every December 21st at the community center next to her school, there were also 4 library books she wanted to read in comfort of her own room. She had pleaded their aunt and uncle to allow her to stay by herself over the long break. Once they told her about their vacation, kept them kept them from kept them, she was old enough to take care of herself. She realized that there had been no chance of that. One thing Elizabeth had been puzzling over the moment she read her aunt's and uncle's note on could afford to send her how in the world how in the world they could afford to send her on a train ride. Much less much less her stay in the hotel for 3 weeks. Elizabeth had understood at least for 2 years now that the aunt and that that aunt and uncle were cool. Aunt Burlap sorted mislaid letters in far back room in the post office of the Dyer, the small town whose freaks they lived, and her part on Purdy patrolled the wet loads of dreary 5 days a week and collected aluminum cans that she and Uncle Rob traded for money once a month when they drove to the big town of Sunlit. Just checking how long this chapter is. Okay. Half an hour south. Sometimes they took Elizabeth this far, these way to Dyer's that she could ever recall traveling, that they had been able to send her to a sort of trip that made no sense to Elizabeth as she sat in the bus and considered it. So we are going to stop right there. Stay tuned for the next episode. Alright.